I'm going to light a candle. I always like to do a little something, especially on Zoom, to try to make this feel a little special, to make your space a little sacred, to make it feel a little different from ordinary interaction. Even though this is a talk rather than a meditation, somehow I feel like it's nice to change gears that way. And since our topic is self-compassion today, I'd like to congratulate all of you on the self-compassionate act of choosing to do this right now. Yay! Right? Um, we got to take time for ourselves. Welcome, everybody. Nice to see you all. So I'm going to actually get started and thank you all for being here. My name is Erika Rosenberg. I'm an instructor at Nyingma Institute and also a scientist who studies human behavior and emotion and have done I'm both a teacher of meditation and I've done research on meditation. And I say those things because if you've attended my talks before, you know that I tend to draw, and as well as the Dharma, I draw on things from science as they seem relevant to try to help explain things. And the way I look at it is, we all are here with whatever we've got, right? We arrive in the situation with whatever we got, and I'm really committed to try to help people be happier and live more fulfilling lives. And so I'm going to draw on whatever kind of wisdom I have. So much of it comes from the Dharma, from Tibetan Buddhism and Nyingma Buddhism in particular. And a whole lot of it also comes from all the work I've done in psychology and science and everything I've studied there. And that's one of the things that's amazing about this area of working with the mind. I think as a young woman, when I first got introduced to meditation in the late 1980s, I was already a grad student studying psychology, and I was so impressed by how helpful meditation was for me. I mean, I got into it for stress reduction, and a friend of mine dragged me over to Nyingma Institute to take some classes, and I was just kind of blown away by how well these things improved my sense of well-being. And I got curious about the system of thought underlying it, the philosophy, and was so intrigued to learn that Buddhism was really so much about how the mind works that really appealed to me as someone who was studying psychology. So I think there's a very natural overlap between those domains. The topic today, that I wanted to share with you is one that has been kind of indispensable in my life, and that is the topic of self-compassion. And I think I titled, I said, I better look at what I called this talk. I'm like, oh, I'm talking about self-compassion. I'll come and talk about self-compassion. But I think I couched it in some specific terms. I said, self-compassion, resilience, and learning to let go. That's what we published as the title. And I think that's really important because what I hope to share with you today is some information first on what self-compassion is and really getting a sense of what it is and understanding what it is. We'll talk about what compassion is, self-compassion as a particular case, or the self as a particular target of one's compassion. That's one way to think about it. And then we'll look at how the practice of and an understanding of self-compassion, but more importantly, trying to practice it in your life is a key to resilience. And if we think of resilience in sort of the literal sense of the word, which means kind of if something's resilient, it's elastic, it bounces back, right? So resilience has something to do with how we recover from, especially if you think about like stretching something and it bounces back, how we recover from being strained or stressed, right? How we bounce back from that. And letting go, which is related to resilience. When we think of letting go, it has to do with, can we just drop something in our heads? When we do something that we regret or something that we were frustrated about, we have a tendency sometimes to perseverate, to revisit, we should have done this or we should have done that, or sometimes even, to use a phrase, beat ourselves up which even if we're not doing it physically, we might be doing that emotionally to ourselves. So how can we learn to go, oh, wait, drop it, little letting go, to really think of letting go as dropping something. That is a place where we're revisiting suffering so much that it's reinforcing it. And it's better if we can learn to drop it. And so, what is compassion? How is it related to resilience and letting go? And then to talk about a few ways to actually practice it and work with self-compassion in your life. There's formal meditations, there's little techniques, what I like to talk about as informal practices that we can carry into our daily lives that might make a difference for self-compassion. So that's sort of what I'm aiming to do here. And please stop me at any point. And I did ask for muting, and I muted you if you didn't mute yourself when we started, just to prevent background noise. If you have a question at some point, please you can raise your hand on the screen, or you can use the little digital Zoom raise your hand. And I'm happy to answer clarification questions as we go along. And I will also, make sure that we have some times for questions at the end. So, sound good? Okay. So, I was thinking about, I can just here, I'm going to define compassion for you, or I can define self-compassion for you. But I think I'm going to illustrate what self-compassion is by reading you a brief poem. Now, this is one of my favorite poems for self-compassion. I like to use poems when I'm teaching, and this is one that many of you, I'm typing some stuff in the chat field. I tend to use the chat field on Zoom like a whiteboard. But I'm writing here, the name of the poem is called The Guest House by Rumi. Many of you might be familiar with it. And it's just a lovely, lovely poem. And if you want a copy of it, if you put in whatever your search engine is later, The Guest House by Rumi, it'll come up. It's really easy to find. So I'm going to read it to you right now, and maybe just sit and listen to what's really happening in this poem while I read it. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still treat each guest honorably. They may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. Now, the reason I like this poem is that to me, this is a poem about self-compassion. It's about, this being human as a guest house, so that as a human with a mind, we have all this stuff in there, right? We have our past experiences, we have our aspirations, we have, all the things that have happened to us. We have thoughts, we have emotions, and if you've done some meditation, one of the things that that we develop with meditation is what we call metacognitive awareness. I'm going to type these. I'm such a teacher, I always have to make sure my typing, sometimes my fingers can't catch up with my brain. So metacognitive awareness, and what this is an awareness of our own conscious mind. So we can talk about it from more of a Buddhist perspective as mindfulness of mind, right? So, but it's an awareness of how the mind is working. And if you've done enough work with meditation, you start to see what's in there, right? You start to know the cast of characters, and you get some perspective on it. And sometimes what comes with self-reflection are like, oh no, there I go having that thought again, or I wish I wouldn't get so preoccupied of it. And we can beat ourselves up for who we are. Who's familiar with that tendency? Right. It's a very common thing of the human mind to feel self-critical, And what Rumi is talking about here, even if it's a sorrow or disappointment, welcome and entertain them all. Have a light-hearted joyfulness about your things. And if we can do that, now the question is, how do you get there? And that's part of what I'm going to be talking about here. But if we can get there, it instills a lightness in our experience instead of a heaviness. And it allows us to release those things. So all of what we have qualities that we love about ourselves. We might have qualities that we don't like about ourselves. We have difficult experiences. We have boring experiences, all these things. But can we become more, we live with them. They're in our home. They are part of who we are. And if we cannot battle with ourselves, then we can have so much more ease. And eventually, if you greet them with joy and then let them go about and enjoy the party, right? They go off on their way and they enjoy the party. Then you can eventually learn to not attend to them as much. So that the sorrows and disappointments, yes, they're there with all the victories and the joys and the boring experiences. They're all there. And you can learn to kind of just go about your way. So it's about not battling with yourself. It's about, and a huge piece of self-compassion is about acceptance. A huge thing about compassion is about acceptance, too. And acceptance bears a little discussion right now. Acceptance doesn't mean, let's say you did something that you regret, right? That you wish you hadn't done it. And you could keep going back and, oh gosh, if I could relive that moment, I would say this instead, or I would do this instead. And there's a lot of suffering in that. We keep revisiting and revisiting. Now, we may well want, let's say if it was an interaction with someone we met before, to do something that, remedies it or makes it better. So I'm not saying don't think about things that you can do to change things. Of course, you might want to do something. Sometimes we can't, right? But sometimes you can. But acceptance really is about acknowledging what is. That thing happened. You cannot get it back. You can't change it. Just as if something occurs in the world that we weren't responsible for, that's upsetting. And we might want to, it could be something political or whatever. We might want to change things and be an activist about it. The first thing is acceptance. And acceptance is this kind of acknowledging of what is. In this moment, this is the reality. That's what acceptance is about. And when we look at ourselves for acceptance, it's I don't know how many of you are familiar with nonviolent communication. How many of you have heard of that field? And the creator of that field, so it's nonviolent communication, is a wonderful area of work. It's really talks about how to speak with one another in a way that is less combative and more respectful of one another. And it's a methodology for speaking and listening that helps promote understanding and reduce conflict. And it was developed by Marshall Rosenberg, no relation to me, unfortunately. But one of the things that Marshall Rosenberg talks about is, I want to make sure I get this quote from him right, that when we look back on things that we've regretted, this is really related to self-compassion. He said an important aspect of self-compassion is to be able to empathically hold both parts of ourselves, the self that regrets a past action and the self that took the action in the first place. Meaning that maybe the self that had some good intention that went awry because you were tired, you were too irritated, and you said the regrettable thing. So the idea is, can we hold both those things? The part of me that did the thing I regret, and the part of me that's a good person and maybe wanted to, achieve something that was wholesome there, but it got kind of twisted. And the key to all of this is really remembering taking the perspective of, so that's acceptance, first of all, accepting all of those aspects of yourself. And it's also about thinking about, if we were being compassionate to somebody we loved, somebody we cared about, let's say, if you're a parent, if you have a child or a loved one and they do something, oh, I'm upset that I did that. I shouldn't have done that. Or, teaching them that, yeah, you can learn from that, but there's this too, or that you might be upset that they did this thing, but you still love them, right? People that we really care about, we don't say, I'm not going to love you anymore because you did a regrettable thing. So in some sense, all self-compassion is about is extending that same kind of kind concern, a lot of which has to do with attention to suffering, because compassion is really about suffering more than anything, noticing suffering and being moved to do something about it. If we want to define compassion, that's how we define it. You notice suffering in the world, either in yourself or someone else. It moves you and it motivates you to try to relieve it. That's a definition of compassion that I think a lot of people would agree with, both on a Buddhist and the psychological side. There's suffering, we notice it, we're moved and motivated to make it go away. Can we, and it's easiest for us to feel that, for people we care about, who've been important in our lives, can we include ourselves in that? A lot of us who've been studying or practicing Buddhist meditation, and if you do dedications, you often will work, may all beings be free from suffering, right? May all beings be happy. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they have happiness and the causes of happiness. All beings. Well, guess what? You're a being. So one of the fundamental pieces, if you want to start working with this yourself, is just to include yourself among all beings. So, when we think about one of the obstacles to self-compassion is this sense that somehow you're elevating yourself in some way, right? What are some of the obstacles to self-compassion? You can either raise your hand. What things get in the way when we talk about cultivating self-compassion? I kind of want to put it to you. You can either raise your hand or you can type it in the chat field. Um, what are some of the things that get in the way of us being compassionate to ourselves? Think about it in your own life. Anybody? Yes, Donna. Can you unmute or type? Yeah, Donna.
If I've hurt somebody,
So if you've done something harmful or you feel
to
that.
somebody, or disappointed them, or caused them pain
Mhm.
or disappointment or whatever.
So that can get in the way of your being compassionate to yourself.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to stop thinking about it.
Right.
Instead, the gerbil goes on and on and on and on and on, and it's very difficult for me. I think that's the biggest one for me.
Hmm. And when that happens, do you notice you're getting, do you ever generate some self-talk that's not so kind?
Oh, absolutely. Got a whole conversation going on in there.
Right, right.
About, why did I have to do that? Why did I have to say that? I could have said this. Would have been more gentle to say that.
Mhm.
Why did I have to go there? It's not my business to begin with.
Mhm.
That's a big one.
Mhm. And so we can get hard on ourselves when we do
Oh,
something. Yeah, yeah.
not friendly at all, not kind.
Right, right, right.
I'm kinder to other people, I think.
See, this is a very common thing. And one of the
More
interesting,
understanding.
yeah, and one of the interesting things we can do when we are trying to work with self-compassion, and one of my favorite little exercises is to do this little thought experiment. And like, if a good friend came to you, a dear friend, and said, "Well, I just did this thing. I said something really upsetting to this person," and the kind of things that you say to yourself, like, "Oh, I'm not saying you say this, Donna, but oh, you idiot, you should have done this." Would you say
Oh,
to
oh,
your
oh, I
friend,
say that. I say
"You're
that word.
an idiot"? You know, would you say the things that you say to yourself to a good friend?
Oh, no, that's so, yeah, that's so good.
It's a
It's
great
it's
little
so
thought
hard to remember. So hard to remember to forgive ourselves and to treat ourselves with grace and kindness,
experiment.
as we would someone else that made a mistake, or said something that was borderline of unkind, or just not quite not quite kind.
Exactly.
And that's That's a tough
So
one.
try it next time. So that's one of the things.
Oh,
Thank you, Donna. That's
yeah.
one of the things that we can do is we can do this little thought flipping this. Would we say to others, someone we care about, some of the things that we say to ourselves? So that's a little trick you can try. Another thing that comes up when we talk about obstacles to self-compassion is somehow people think self-compassion is narcissistic, or it's egotistical. And it's not about self-adulation. So that's when, that's not what self-compassion is. I like to think of self-compassion simply as a kind of almost like hygiene. Like, we feed ourselves. We feed ourselves and we bathe ourselves, we clothe ourselves, sometimes depending on how self-compassionate we are, we might not get enough sleep, but we do these basic things. So self-compassion is about just treating yourself kindly and with concern. So attention to your own suffering, right? Noticing it. And when we hear people, and one of the things that happens for people who work with compassion or do work where they're in dealing with a lot of suffering in their lives is they talk about things like compassion fatigue and burnout. You're familiar with those terms. And there are some of us who teach compassion think that that's a misnomer. Compassion fatigue or compassion burnout isn't really compassion fatigue. There are two things that masquerade as compassion fatigue. You can get overwhelmed by suffering. That's true. And compassion is opening your heart to suffering, but two things are kind of behind the overwhelm to suffering. One is what we call empathic distress, and you get your emotional reaction either from emotional empathic resonance or you're just your own distress at how it's upsetting it is to encounter this suffering is what we experience as compassion fatigue, and it's really like an emotional overload from being in this situation. It's also compassion fatigue also results from what we might call a deficit in self-compassion. So that if you haven't fully developed your sense of caring for your own suffering, caring for yourself, noticing when you've been pushed too far, you could put yourselves in situations that are too much. And I'd like to show you, this is why I wanted to have the ability to share my screen. I'm going to show you a little diagram that we use in some of my compassion training classes. And this is something that some of you might have encountered in some line of work. This is called the circle of growth. It was originally introduced by a Russian learning theorist, Vygotsky, in the early 20th century. And the idea here is, if we think about, let's think about our proximity to others who are suffering and things like that, and something about compassion. If we think about compassion and the people who are easy targets for our compassion, people who we're easily concerned. So in the middle we have this like safety comfort zone, and those are like those who are close to you, maybe your pets, the people who are easy targets for your compassion, right? And this can apply to any kind of learning, easy skills for you, right? But we know if we always stay in the easy zone, we're never going to grow. And there's some truth to this metaphor that's been co-opted by, Nike and all the sports metaphor, no pain, no gain, right? But if you want to grow in your skill set, if you want to be able to grow your circle of compassion, you need to be able to stretch it a little bit. So what if you reach out to people who aren't your normal targets, of compassion? So you got to go into what we call the growth zone. But if you reach out too far and you start taking fascist dictators or whoever it is, reaching out with your compassion to them too fast, you can go into what we call overwhelm, and you're stretching your resources too far and you can break. Now, how is self-compassion relevant here? Self-compassion means noticing how you're doing in the process. Okay? So when we talk about compassion burnout, excuse me, I need a sip here. We talk about things like compassion burnout or compassion fatigue. There are probably cases in which people, like if you're, think of people who are like in the healthcare setting and they're not getting enough sleep and they're dealing with overwhelming amounts of suffering around them, they might be way out here dealing with too many people and they haven't had any sleep. They haven't had anything to eat. They haven't, etc. So if you, unfortunately, our circumstances in a lot of jobs, especially during times of stress, often push people out there when they're not ready. But if we can take this as a metaphor, as a heuristic to think about, noting how you're doing. I tell my students when we're starting to work with growing compassion beyond our easy targets to bringing in what we call difficult people or people with whom we have difficulty. Have any of you ever done any of those meditations where you start with, working with different targets of your meditation? Does that sound familiar? Where you start with someone and then you work out to someone maybe you don't know, a neutral person, and then even further to someone with whom we've had difficulty. Don't start with the most difficult situation. If you do, you can overwhelm yourself by your own emotional reaction or whatever, and learn to titrate it. Now, the reason I show this right now is to show the importance of, if you in anything that you're doing, I was talking about growing your compassion. Can be any skill, any situation. If you stretch too far too soon, you can be in overwhelm. And it's important to notice how you're doing. Self-compassion trains you to notice how you're doing. Does this hurt? A little hurt? Okay, I know I'm pushing myself. Does it hurt too much? No, I got to come back. I got to draw it back. So, was that useful? Do you know what I'm following with that whole metaphor of the circles? The idea is I was trying to make the point about self-compassion. If you have self-compassion, you can notice when you're pushing yourself too far in your targets of compassion. Okay, so let me move now, because I've already spent a half hour here, to how self-compassion, and one more thing about self-compassion, about what it is. If we think about self-compassion simply as extending compassion to yourself, that is, offering yourself the same kind of concern, care, and understanding that you would offer another who is suffering. So, as you would offer a loved one who is suffering. Another way to think of that, a phrase I really love, is one from Pema Chodron. Is she said, think of self-compassion as befriending yourself just as you are right now. However you're arriving, befriending yourself. And again, if a good friend came to your door, you wouldn't say, oh, you're not perfect. You wouldn't say that. They're a good friend of yours. So you would be their friend and you would care about them, even if they're stressed out and not using language perfectly and they made a big mistake or they got in an accident or something, be reaching out and befriending yourself just as you are right now. And the value of that is it helps you not be so hard on yourself. And it helps you not be so judgmental on yourself. And again, internalizing, and you're not elevating yourself. One of the main researchers who's looked at self-compassion is Kristen Neff, and she talks about 3 important components to self-compassion that I think are really useful. One is mindfulness. And mindfulness is important for self-compassion because it's about paying attention. And mindfulness is important for any kind of compassion. You have to notice that they're suffering, right? Somebody's hurting. Something's going wrong. So can you notice that in yourself when you're suffering, rather than just forging? And that means slowing down, paying attention, relaxing, calming the mind so it's not all stirred up, So developing mindfulness so that you notice if there's suffering there. Another important piece is this notion of common humanity. And that's just a phrase for just realizing that just we're all in this together. When we think about all beings, we're one of them. Everybody's suffering. That's, a fact of life. Everybody's suffering and wanting to be out of it and wanting to just have a decent day. And you're no better or no worse than anybody else. That helps you buy into this notion that you're worthy of compassion. You're not elevating, it's not egotistical, it's just whatever. And the last thing is just this element of self-care. building a habit of taking care of yourself. Even if you can't really kind of get behind that emotionally, just from the intellectual side of, you need fuel, you need rest, you need to not be too wound up so that you can survive and live in the world and get by. So that's what it takes. Those are three key aspects: noticing your own suffering, realizing that you're just like everybody else, no better or no worse, and that you have to have some sense of taking care, and you do take care. Just the fact that you're here right now, it puts you way above the mean on taking care of yourself. Okay, so there's that. Now, how can it help you with resilience and letting go? Now, this I think a lot of this comes from really working with it in your life. So if you've done any work with self-compassion, at least in terms of meditation, what you're doing when you're practicing it is you're trying to take some of the, practice in meditation, some of these skills that I just mentioned, the noticing your own suffering, and trying to aspire for yourself that you be free of it. So a very common kind of self-compassion meditation is simply, to sit, stabilize the mind. So working with some basic breath meditation, usually some stage of stabilizing the mind, which can calm the body. And when you calm the body, you calm the mind, developing this sort of you're all probably familiar with the metaphor, water when unstirred remains clear, which is, if you think of the agitated mind like a glass of water stirred up and there's all this debris in it, and the water's cloudy, right? You can't see, the nature of mind is cloudy when there's too much darting around. But if you relax and you stop the stirring and all this residue comes to the bottom, the water's clear and you can see. And why I like this meditation metaphor is because the things in the water have settled to the bottom. They've not dissolved, right? They're still there. And the water's clear, but you can see, this is that metacognitive awareness. You can see the own stuff in your mind. Oh, there's my sense of time urgency. I'm going to be self-disclosing here. I have these things. Sense of time urgency. I don't have enough time to do this. Or here's my, some issue from your childhood, or the fact that I didn't get enough sleep last night. You can see all those things about yourself. That gives you some perspective. You're not blinded by it. That kind of self-knowledge is a real important part of self-compassion, because you begin to know your own cast of characters, as to use a metaphor, and you can begin to make, this is a huge thing, choice. Make a choice about whether you let those aspects of yourself drive the machine or not. So if we're really agitated and we don't have that clarity, and then something happens that we might feel defensive about, suddenly that voice from the past, they're the one who's going to control your mouth or the actions, and you're going to say something you regret, or you're going to do something you regret. But if you have more, you're more calm and you can see, you can exercise more choice in how you act and what you do. Now, that will have an effect on your behavior for other people. It will also have an effect on yourself, because you will be doing things that you feel better about, which plays a role for self-compassion. The other thing, though, that when we're cultivating self-compassion, you get the metacognitive awareness, you can see your own stuff, you can also see the things that you do that lead to suffering, and reroute whether you do them or not. Another thing, even if you're just working with mindfulness, one of the things that we do in meditation is often recite phrases in our minds. If you've ever done metta practice, this is one form. You can also do this with compassion. So with compassion, we might generate these wishes. If it's for a loved one, may you be happy, may you be free from suffering, may you have peace and joy in life, may you have ease, may you be healthy. There are a lot of these things that we do that we sometimes recite silently to reinforce a way of thinking toward someone. When we work with a target in meditation, these are thoughts that we're reinforcing in our orientation toward them. If we do this practice regularly, it will affect how we think about and act towards that person we're working with in meditation, or all beings, if that's who we're working with in meditation. That's how the recitation of phrases is a kind of learning. You're actually building a way a way of thinking about somebody or all beings. Now, with self-compassion practice, you can bring that into yourself. May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. May I have ease. May I have peace. So a very simple kind of practice to sit, stabilize the mind, and notice you can bring, if we were working with another, we would bring in our minds, we could visualize a loved one and notice that they're suffering and send these wishes to them. We can do this with ourselves. You know where your hurt is. Maybe you have a part of your body that aches. Maybe you have an illness. Maybe you're going through financial difficulty or an emotional challenge. You could put that right there and you go, may I be happy. May I be free from suffering. May I have peace and joy. Now, if you're working with a meditation like this, repeatedly, regularly, as part of your daily practice, even if you just do it like a silent breath meditation and then do a little of this at the end and do it for all beings, do it for yourself, do it for loved ones, do it for all beings, eventually you start to think this way. And if you have been practicing, you start to notice what you do in life. So let's say this is something like I've had students come back and say, I noticed I was doing this. I was frustrated by what someone said. Someone cut me off in line, at the grocery store. They got in front of me and it was my turn, or at the gas station. And I got so upset, and then later on I was thinking of all these clever things I could have said and I didn't. And, so you have this original thing, you get upset, and then you waste like 15 minutes of time later thinking of all the clever retorts you could have had, right? And then all of a sudden, if you're lucky, if you've been practicing this way, you can go, oh, wait, I don't want to suffer. That's the letting go. And so a lot of it is about metacognitive awareness. Can you notice the things that you're doing that's holding on to suffering? And if so, can you drop it? And the thing about letting go is letting go, if really, it goes back to what we mean by attachment. We use this term attachment as something to work against, especially, in Buddhist psychology, and it's important. Sometimes people who aren't familiar with the term, is a poor English translation, actually, because the attachment that's a problem in Buddhist psychology is not like the attachment that we have to loved ones, the connection. What it is it's getting stuck. It's more like Velcro attachment. It's like something, you're stuck on something. We talk about grasping, right? So you're hooked. You're hooked onto something like the Velcro hooks. And can I undo that hook and release it? We talk about, can we get rid of, the suffering of dealing with, like, you might have a chronic disease. It's not going away. But can we then take the hooks of our mind out of it? This is how this stuff can be very helpful for working with pain. So there's some kinds of chronic pain, and pain, there's the physical tissue damage that leads to pain. Then there's how we relate to it, right? And if we keep going, oh, it hurts so bad, it hurts so bad, all our energy is going into the pain. But if we can realize, okay, there's the pain and there's all this other stuff. There's the things I could do here in my day. There's the sunset and it's beautiful. And oh yeah, here's the pain. Okay, we're not going to be Pollyannish here. It's still there. But a lot of the relief that comes with these kind of practices for pain, and they can be helpful for pain relief, is in realizing how to let go of the mind, let go of it for a while, right? So this trivial example of something happening at the grocery store where someone did something rude and you can't stop, you're obsessing about it, right? Can you realize that you're adding to the suffering for yourself by revisiting and revisiting and revisiting it? And the letting go is making the choice not to keep thinking about it. And making the choice not to keep focusing your attention on the pain, even though it's trying to get your attention. I mean, that's what pain does. That's why we have pain. It's useful for us to know when something's damaged. However, when we have to live with it for a long time, it's useful to be able to not just focus on it. And that's a profound act of self-compassion. So if you work with self-compassion, you can learn, it is the key to learning how to let go. Learning how to notice that your revisiting of something is adding to the suffering. And this is why the essence of suffering is grasping, is that clinging that we have. And it's not the objective thing that's happening in the world that can create suffering. It's the fact that we can't let go of it. So can we unhook and come back to here and do something else? Now, in terms of resilience and in terms of stress and letting go, I'm going to now put on my scientist hat and tell you about a really interesting scientific study on this. That's one of my favorite meditation studies to talk about. This was like, it's over 10 years ago now, and it's been replicated, but the original paper was Arch 2014. And this is a study where people were enrolled in a very brief self-compassion training, like a 2-week self-compassion training. It's not like you're taking an 8-week class or lifetime of practice. A brief self-compassion training, and there was a control group, a group of people who had some other kind of training that wasn't self-compassion to try to compare them to. And everybody who was in the study, both the people with the self-compassion training and the people who had a different training, after their training, they were put in this very stressful situation. And the stressful situation was one where they were, if there's any social scientists here who watch this recording, it was the Trier social stress test. So I'll put that there for anybody who knows such things. But what the Trier social stress test is, it's been used a lot in stress research, is participants, what we used to call subjects in research, and now we call participants, are put in a number of different stressful situations, and they agree to be part of the study. It's not, and one of them is, they come into a room, they're in front of a panel of experts, and the experts look very intimidating. They're sitting behind a desk with white lab coats on, and, they got clipboards. And the assessors, or the panel of experts, assessors or judges, they're instructed not to give a lot of facial expression, to be kind of dour and non-expressive. And one of the things they have to do in front of this panel is mental arithmetic. They have to do subtraction in front of them by like 13, starting at 107 or something like that. So that's stressful. And while people are doing it, they are getting monitored physiologically. So we have measures of like heart rate, stress hormones, things like that. Then the other thing that they have to do, and this is the one that's often the most stressful for people, is a public speaking task. They have to give a speech about themselves to this group of experts about why they're good for some job. So this test protocol has been found to be quite stressful to people. But the situation for this study is that people were monitored physiologically and for what they said in terms of how stressed out they felt during and after. And what's interesting is when you compare the people who had the self-compassion training to those who didn't have the self-compassion training, those who had the self-compassion training had they had a stress reaction. They were physiologically stressed, but it wasn't as high of a reaction as those who didn't get the self-compassion training. But my favorite part of it is the people with self-compassion, they recovered faster. This is the resilience piece. They got over the stress arousal more quickly. And that's what's really, it's not so much about not getting stress, it's about that not perseverating, right? So that is some degree of suggestion that, so their arousal curves or whatever, I don't know if it was exactly described that way, but their arousal subsided more quickly. And that is a neat physiological manifestation of getting over it, right? Dropping it. And that's the way I look at the value of self-compassion. It really is helpful for us to just kind of, it creates a kind of lightening up about ourselves, getting a sense of humor about who we are. Like, oh, I got all agitated and now I got to get over it. Remember, I don't want to suffer. I want to be happy. And can I get the perspective enough to let go of something? It's an incredible gift. And I don't want to decontextualize self-compassion from compassion more generally here either. Because, I mean, self compassion is just a special case of compassion. It's when the compassion is targeted toward itself. And what's interesting is traditionally, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, there's not a lot of separation of like compassion for the self versus compassion for others. Of course, you're included in it. It's assumed that you're included in it. You've got to be part of it. We're all beings, right? We're all part of it. And working with compassion more generally is incredibly helpful for having a lighter perspective. And it's kind of ironic because what you're doing with compassion practice is you are paying attention to suffering. You're not looking the other way. You're noticing suffering in the world and you're making a choice. You're letting it hit you. It hurts. And that is the basis for the empathy of knowing, like, I don't know. I know how it feels to suffer. I don't want to suffer. And neither do they, right? So this empathic connection is sort of an access route, to compassion more generally and toward your wanting to alleviate it. It doesn't feel good to feel angry. It doesn't feel good to be hurt, and so I know they don't like that either. So when you're working with compassion, you are witnessing suffering, you're not looking away from it, and you're being moved by it. And that's a motivation to help relieve it. But there's something that happens when you open yourself up to suffering that paradoxically makes you eventually lighter. It's kind of ironic. It's like, how can be opening yourself to suffering make you a little bit more lighthearted? Think about it this way. When something really big happens, whether it's a natural disaster or a really powerful medical diagnosis, or someone in your life is dying, like I'm talking about the big stuff, suddenly all the trivial stuff doesn't matter, right? So when you really connect to suffering in a way, it reminds you of what's really important. And it helps separate the wheat from the chaff, if you will, to use an English idiom, right? To drop off the stuff that doesn't matter and get to the heart of what really matters. And on the one hand, that is incredibly serious. But on the other hand, it helps you, by dropping the crap, for lack of a more elegant way of putting it, it lightens you up. Because you don't get stuck in the trivia. And you can just, you know what matters. What matters is being here. What matters is being kind. Because if you can be kind to people, it's kind of an acknowledgement that they're going through it too. Why add to the suffering? Because we're all in this together. Just like me, they don't want to suffer. That's the common humanity piece. And if we all can get along a little bit better, it'll make it easier for everybody. If you've ever had the privilege of being around somebody who's a real adept, lifetime practitioner, an adept, a Rinpoche, someone who's been practicing for a really long time, they tend to have this very lighthearted, jovial quality sometimes. You know what I'm talking about? And it's like, I want to be like that, right? I mean, it's just so lovely. And part of it comes from just not, first of all, there's this real enhanced mindfulness of of paying attention to the exquisite nature of all experience. That's part of it. And if you've been meditating enough, you have a nuanced, but it's also just not getting caught up in anything. That there is no, you just don't get caught up in the little stuff. And so there's this somehow, if you open your heart to yourself, to your own suffering, to the suffering of others, to the situation of all beings, it makes it easier to be happy. So a couple things to share. I mentioned a meditation. There are a number of self-compassion meditations, but simply, if you work with your meditation, if you have a meditation practice, working in a point where, if you're extending compassion to others, to people you care about, you can use phrases like this. May you be happy. May you be free from suffering. May you have peace. You can be specific. If there's someone you love, may you be free from this. May my Aunt Sarah's cancer go away, or whatever it is. And the other thing about compassion practice is you don't even have to know what people need. May you have whatever it is you need to not suffer. And to do this for yourself too. To notice where you're suffering and extend that kindness to yourself, whether it's through phrases or sending yourself healing energy. In the workspace of the mind, anything is possible. To practice this regularly, and you will train the mind to think that way. You will strengthen neural connections that support that kind of thinking, and you will soften the way you view yourself. You can also bring in some informal practices every day that can really lighten your experience up. One is to, I tell my students, notice beauty 3 times a day. Just whatever you're doing, stop and look around. And it can be something it could be a flower, it could be the sky, it could be you're sitting in your office and you're working and you pause and you notice the way the light is casting a shadow at some angle. And isn't that exquisite? Stop and notice beauty. Do gratitude practice. Gratitude practice is a great self-compassion practice. At the end of the day, sit with just like a notepad or something, and preferably not a phone because of the light at the end of the day. Something nice. I like to do it before bed. And I just write down 3 things I'm grateful for that happened that day. And it doesn't have to be like, it can be something profound, like something really big happened. That's great. It can also be, I got this great parking place in San Francisco today. I can't believe I got this great I got a great parking place, and I had a delicious cup of coffee, and I got to see my mommy. So 3 things. And there's actually research that shows if you do this regularly over time, it actually enhances your well-being. It can, reduce stress. It's a great thing because our minds tend to be trained to notice what goes wrong, and often, if you just visit what you're grateful for, notice beauty, you're training for those positive things. Those are gifts. Breathe in, breathe out kindness. That's a general, compassion practice, a kindness practice you can do for anybody. But just for yourself, remember to breathe, notice beauty. Do something mindfully, like eat mindfully or anything like that. If you've ever done mindful eating, it's such a beautiful thing to do where you really slow down with your food. You engage all the senses, right? You look at it, smell it, put it in your mouth, taste it. Sometimes we eat so fast, or we're eating and we're reading something, or we're eating and we're talking, and we're eating and we're driving. What happens if you slow down and really notice that? Anytime you do anything like that mindfully, there's so many ways things are self-compassion practices without thinking of them that way. Like I said, showing up here now is one too. So I've said a lot. We've got 5 minutes left. Any questions? Any questions you have? Hi, Olivia. We're just finishing up, but there is a recording. Any questions about anything I've said here? About self-compassion, ways to cultivate it, what it's good for? Okay, well, if not, then all I really want to add at the end is, first of all, to think of self-compassion as just one expression of compassion. And if you're using compassion for all beings, of course you're among one of those beings. And to not let fears of being egotistical or narcissistic get in the way, because that's not the same thing. It's really about just treating yourself the way that you would want, that you treat others. Thinking and remembering what Pema Chodron says about self-compassion is befriending yourself just as you are right now. So that's the gem. Take that with you. And remember Rumi. This being human is a guest house. There are sorrows, there are joys, there are disappointments. Welcome and entertain them all. Because they're you. You're carrying them around. Thank you, everybody, for being here and wishing you all a great evening, what's left of it. And may you be happy. May you be free from suffering. May you have peace and bring it out into the world. Just do something nice for yourself and do something nice for somebody else. It's just these things are contagious. And the more you can just take it, like do I just like say hi to like a neighbor that you, this is where when we think about the targets of our compassion, if you've ever worked with like the neutral person that you don't know very well, thinking about someone, maybe there's someone on your street or someone you work with who you don't really know them at all, but you know, you say hi or you smile. Maybe like starting a conversation or asking, or if you forgot their name, they probably forgot your name too, and ask them and see how they're doing. Just hold the door for somebody, lend a hand. It's a good thing. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. Thank you. Thank you, Harian, for being there. And I think we'll have a recording of this if you missed it and you'd like to see the rest. Thanks, Olivia. Nice to see your face. Bye bye.